Let me take you somewhere painfully ordinary, a quiet suburb just outside Belgrade. A street where the biggest drama is usually a neighbor yelling about someone's dog escaping again. But this house was hiding something that didn't belong in a suburb. It didn't even belong in the same universe as normal life. It started with a simple garage search in 2021. Police opened it expecting tools, winter tires, maybe a rusted lawnmower. Instead, they found a hidden door. Behind it, a small concrete room. No windows, no furniture, just a drain in the floor. And right in the middle, an industrial meat grinder. And trust me, nobody thought this thing was for sausages. According to prosecutors, this room was used by a group led by Velika Balivuk, better known as Velia Nuvalia. Investigators say they had built what looked like a suburban slaughterhouse to eliminate rivals, suspected traitors, and anyone who crossed them. Some victims were allegedly tortured, butchered, and their remains dumped into the Danube. Police say parts of the room were so thoroughly cleaned it took luminol to reveal what had happened there. But here's the detail that still makes detectives shake their heads. The group photographed almost everything: the torture, the bodies, even bizarre grinning poses beside victims. Why? Because they believed one thing with absolutely certainty: their encrypted phones could never be cracked. And that belief, that blind confidence, was exactly what destroyed them. So, how do we know all this? How do investigators know what happened inside the concrete room? Because the phone system the group relied on, the one marketed as unbreakable, turned out to be anything but. They weren't using WhatsApp, they weren't using Signal, they were on modified Sky ECC devices. Phones heavily advertised in criminal circles as the safest way to communicate on Earth. Self destructing messages, encrypted servers, anonymous users. To them, it felt like the digital equivalent of whispering in a soundproof basement. Prosecutors say Balavik's men sent pictures of mutilated victims with captions like, "Look, Mexico in the middle of Belgrade." They believed those messages evaporated into the void. But in 2020, European investigators quietly infiltrated the Sky ECC network. They located servers in France. They cracked parts of the group chat system. And suddenly, messages that were supposed to be invisible began lighting up police screens across Europe. Drug shipments, kidnapping plans, extortion details, and yes, photos from inside the torture room. Over 2 million messages were recovered, not months later, not years, in real time while operations were still ongoing. European agencies immediately passed the intelligence to Serbia. And when Serbian authorities connected the dots, they realized this wasn't just another gang. This was one of the most feared organized crime groups in the Balkans. And the deeper they looked, the darker it got. To understand how something like this could exist, you need to understand where Balovic came from. His people call themselves Principi. They weren't graffiti tagging teenagers, they weren't petty street thugs, they were football ultras, specifically from Partizan Belgrade. Now, in the Balkans, ultras doesn't mean superfan. Ultras are foot soldiers. Stadiums are not just stadiums, they're recruiting grounds, battlegrounds, and sometimes command centers. Belvik wasn't just a member, he was a rising power in a long-running plot feud between two major Montenegrin clans, Kavic and Skaliari, groups known for settling disputes with car bombs, ambushes, and assassins. But bodies cause problems, bodies attract questions, bodies require explanations. So prosecutors say the group built a system where bodies simply didn't remain. The descriptive messages painted brutal scenes. One victim, reportedly a former friend, was lured in because he was suspected of betrayal. In a chat, someone wrote, "If everything goes well, in a few days, he's going to the slaughterhouse." Investigators later recovered images showing the aftermath, including the word treason cut into a victim's skin. All of this sent over phones the group believed were invincible. They thought they were writing their own legend. Instead, they were documenting their own conviction. But what the messages revealed next shocked even hardened detectives, because the line between the gang and the state started to blur. You'd think the story ends here. Gang caught, phones cracked, case closed. But no. If anything, this was where the real trouble began. During an earlier investigation in 2017, years before the grinder was discovered, a confidential police report noted troubling connections between Balavik and certain members of law enforcement. According to leaked documents later reported by Serbian and international media, one high ranking police commander allegedly maintained unusually close communication with the group. Some reports claim he offered protection, warned them about certain operations, or attended social gatherings that didn't look much like official business. Recordings surfaced, laughing voices, casual conversations that sounded nothing like how an elite police officer should speak with suspected criminals. Now, to be absolutely clear, no court has established that he ordered violence, directed murders, or coordinated attacks. Those claims remain unproven. But the optics, they were bad, very bad. And the fact that the commander remained in the police force for years afterward raised even more questions, because investigators eventually discovered he was not the only point of contact. As the descriptive Sky messages were analyzed, certain names and initials appeared, some familiar, some coded. One of the most frequently discussed figures was Diana Harkalovic, then State Secretary in the Ministry of Interior, one of the most powerful law enforcement positions in Serbia. Prosecutors later suggested that she maintained communication with individuals close to the gang. Media outlets reported messages that allegedly referenced their initials. Some interpreted this as indications of influence or interference in police work. But here's the legally important part. She has never been convicted of anything related to murder, torture, or organized killings. She was convicted only for abuse of office relating to mishandled surveillance records, charges she denies. Still, the lingering question remained. How much did officials really know? Messages also referenced shadowy figures nicknamed Boss and Big Boss. Their identities were never confirmed. Their roles, if any, remain unproven, but their presence sparked speculation across Serbia. Was this just a gang operating in the cracks of the system? Or was someone bigger pulling the strings? No one has provided a definitive answer. And this brings us to the most explosive moment of the entire trial. When Balovic stood in court, he denied the murders, but he made one claim without hesitation. He said that he and his group, his words, had acted as the service of President Aleksandar Vučić. It was the kind of statement that ricochets across the country. But here's what matters legally. There is no evidence supporting that claim. Serbian officials deny it completely. No prosecutors has filed charges suggesting it's true. Most observers believe Balovic said it to muddy the waters, to paint himself as a pawn rather than a butcher. Still, once the claim was spoken, it could not be unspoken, because the Sky messages didn't just expose crimes, they exposed questions. Questions about where the gang ended and where the state began. Questions no official has ever fully answered, and in Serbia, silence is often louder than denial. Today, Balovic and members of his group sit in prison awaiting the outcomes of multiple trials. The torture room has been photographed, logged as evidence, sealed off. The general and Diana Harkalovic are free. Officials insist the state had nothing to do with the gang's crimes. Journalists continue digging, politicians continue deflecting, but the grinder remains the symbol no one can escape. A machine designed to erase physical traces, exposed only because digital traces refuse to die. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of the entire case. Criminals break the law. That's expected. But when encrypted phones crack open and they reveal shadows reaching into the institutions meant to stop them, you're left staring at a question Serbia will wrestle with for years. How deep did the darkest really go? And that's it for today. If you like that video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel to not miss our next story, and leave a comment down below. And as always, stay curious, stay sharp, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.